Amara first saw the house on Elmwood Street on a crisp, hopeful Saturday morning. It was a sprawling Victorian, weathered but magnificent, a monument to a past she felt ready to claim as her future. She was an urban planner, sharp, accomplished, and possessed of a belief in the inherent goodness of community. When she closed on the house in Hawthorne Heights, a neighborhood known for its immaculate lawns, towering oaks, and a profound homogeneity, she wasn't just buying property, she was investing in a dream of belonging. The reality, however, was colder than the late autumn air. Hawthorne Heights was pristine, but its welcome was glacial. Amara, with her warm, mahogany skin and bright, easy smile, was an immediate, glaring contradiction to the established landscape. The humiliation she faced was never loud or violent. It was subtle, insidious, and constant. 1,000 tiny, invisible paper cuts designed to bleed a spirit dry. Her first week, she baked a tray of lemon shortbread and walked them over to Mrs. Albright, the matriarch who lived across the street. Mrs. Albright accepted the plate, her eyes fixed somewhere over Amara's shoulder. "We don't tend to encourage unfamiliar foods," she'd said, the words delivered with the clinical precision of a surgeon. "We prefer simple consistency here." The next day, Amara found the empty, unwashed plate left on her own doorstep. The neighborhood learned her schedule quickly. Whenever she left for work, the watering of the hydrangeas would begin on the adjoining lawn, the hose pressure inexplicably aimed just high enough to miss the driver's side of her car. Her meticulously organized recycling bins would mysteriously vanish the night before collection, only to reappear, overflowing with unapproved contents, an hour after the truck had passed. Once, a note was slipped under her door, not threatening, but advisory. "The noise of your wind chime disrupts the natural peace of the block. We suggest its removal." Amara, who did not own a wind chime, simply smiled sadly, knowing the noise they heard was her very presence. But Amara was anchored by a profound, unshakable kindness. She was honest to a fault, her ethics as sharp and unyielding as granite. She refused to let the pettiness of others contaminate her own core. When Mr. Finch's elderly cat wandered into her yard, she didn't just return it. She spent an hour reinforcing the weak spot in his fence, refusing his begrudging offer of money. When Mrs. Albright's newspaper blew down the street, Amara retrieved it, smoothed the pages, and left it neatly on her porch. She treated every act of malice with an act of grace. Her philosophy was simple: you cannot dim my light by trying to extinguish yours. At work, Amara's reputation soared. She was the youngest senior urban strategist the firm had ever hired. Her ability to see a city not as concrete and steel, but as a living, breathing ecosystem of human needs, set her apart. She was currently leading a massive, high-stakes project, the revitalization of the city's historic waterfront, a proposal that would define the next 50 years of urban life. It required impeccable integrity, tireless dedication, and an ability to navigate complex political currents. Her colleagues, mostly men from the same established circles as her neighbors, often tried to intimidate her. Meanwhile, Hawthorne Heights continued its passive war. The worst incident occurred when a local community group, led by Mrs. Albright's son, filed a frivolous lawsuit against Amara's firm, attempting to block the waterfront project, claiming it would increase traffic near their neighborhood, a neighborhood 10 miles away from the site. The move was clearly designed to sabotage her professionally. The lawsuit was dismissed, but the message was clear: they wanted her gone. The true turning point, however, came during the brutal summer heatwave. Hawthorne Heights had an aging, complex underground sprinkler system shared by 3 key blocks. It failed catastrophically during the peak drought. Lawns turned brown, and the delicate, expensive landscaping the residents prized began to die. Panic set in. The men of the community, CEOs, lawyers, finance brokers, gathered to debate solutions, their conversations devolving into accusations and technical ignorance. They called engineers who quoted astronomical prices and weeks of delay. They purposefully excluded Amara from their frantic, loud discussions held on the sidewalk, despite her house being central to the affected zone. Amara didn't wait to be asked. She went to her garage, grabbed a shovel and her professional drafting tools. She knew the original 1920s blueprint for the neighborhood utility infrastructure was filed digitally at City Hall because she had worked on its archiving years ago. She accessed the files remotely, traced the original, flawed configuration, and walked out to the curb. "It's not a burst pipe," she stated, speaking calmly to the sweaty, arguing group. "It's a failed pressure regulator near the main valve. The system is too old to handle the simultaneous demand. If you bypass that one valve and install a simple, modern check valve 2 feet to the north, you regain 80% pressure without having to dig up the entire street." She was ignored. "Mr. Finch," his face crimson, told her curtly, "We'll wait for the professional report. Thank you, Amara." Amara didn't argue. She simply started digging where she knew the bypass had to go. She dug for 3 hours in the blistering sun. She bypassed the failing valve with temporary components she kept in her architectural toolkit, and then she installed a heavy-duty regulator. By the time the sun began to set, the gentle, steady hiss of water could be heard running back into the system. The homeowners watched, stunned, as their sprinklers flickered back to life. Amara hadn't asked for money, credit, or thanks. She simply cleaned her tools, covered the trench, and went inside, exhausted.
As dawn broke over Hawthorne Heights, the sun poured its golden rays onto the perfectly manicured lawns, but none shone brighter than Mrs. Albright's. It was as if the shimmering emerald blades had absorbed the light itself, glistening defiantly against the muted hues of the homes surrounding it. Yet beneath the surface of this picturesque neighborhood, a subtle transformation was unfolding. Initially, the dynamics in the neighborhood shifted like shadows at dusk. Neighbors who once cast sidelong glances at Amara Jenkins, whose very presence seemed to provoke a simmering tension, began to shift their gaze. They stopped merely looking through her and started looking at her. Their eyes lost the sharp edges of judgment and instead sparked with a confused yet respectful curiosity. They began to see not the racial differences, but the unwavering competence and the disarming generosity that defined her. Months passed, and the true victory for Amara arrived like the first bloom of spring after a long winter. It was 6 months later when the city council convened, and in a moment that felt like eternity, they voted unanimously to approve her waterfront revitalization plan. The mayor heralded it as the most forward-thinking urban project in a century. And suddenly, the echoes of doubt faded into cheers of recognition. Amara was no longer just a name. She was a force. As the accolades poured in, she found herself elevated to a new height, offered the title of Deputy Commissioner of Metropolitan Development, a position imbued with immense power, influence, and responsibility. Her success felt palpable, as if the air itself shimmered with the energy of possibility. The local newspaper, a staple in the community, took notice, plastering her face across the front page with the headline, "Local Resident and Visionary, Amara Jenkins, Appointed Deputy Commissioner." On the day that her story splashed across the newsprint, Amara stepped outside to her car, the sun electrifying her sharp, beautiful suit and the gleaming briefcase in her hand. But as she approached the vehicle, she paused, feeling a knot of anticipation in her stomach. Mrs. Albright was perched on her porch, the usual sour look replaced by a hesitant, almost nervous expression. In her hands, she held a delicate tray, a stark contrast to the tension that had once existed between them. "Amara," Mrs. Albright managed, her voice wavering like the leaves in a gentle breeze. The name felt foreign on her tongue, a bridge built across an expanse of misunderstanding. I made too many of my blueberry scones. Would you like a few for your trip to City Hall?" In that moment, Amara understood. It wasn't an apology. It was the best that the proud, yet broken spirit of Hawthorne Heights could offer. It was a nod of recognition, not of rank or power, but of decency. With a glance at the plate and then at the woman who had once sought to diminish her, Amara did what she had always done. She smiled, a genuine, kind-hearted smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Albright. That is very kind," she replied softly, her heart swelling with an unexpected warmth. "I appreciate it." As she got into her car and drove away, she felt an exhilarating shift within her. She was no longer just a resident on Elmwood Street. She had become a commanding presence in the city. Her humiliation had faded not because the people around her had fundamentally changed, but because her success was so vast, so undeniable, that they had no choice but to adjust the world to fit her. Amara had won, not by fighting hate with hate, but by overwhelming prejudice with pure, brilliant light. She didn't just belong to Hawthorne Heights. By virtue of her presence and success, Hawthorne Heights now belonged, however grudgingly, to her story.